Who are you calling? The
Sometimes
White
the
House?
smallest voice
Good
in
morning,
the
Mr.
room
President.
carries
I'll
the
be there
heaviest
shortly.
truth. The words would only make sense weeks later, when everything lay broken and rebuilt. But for now, there was only the quiet hum of wealth. Morning spilled like melted gold across the Voss estate, an expanse of glass and silence stretching over the hills outside Manhattan. Inside, everything gleamed, marble that reflected faces like mirrors, chrome edges sharp enough to slice pride, and the faint scent of citrus polish chasing every breath. You, Grace Moendi, moved through that palace the way light passes through dust. Unnoticed, necessary. Your uniform was crisp, your words careful. Every morning began the same. Check the crystal cabinet. Wipe the fingerprint off the piano key Dominic had touched in passing. Iron the linen until it sighed beneath the press. Dominic Voss liked order. He liked the universe to answer in straight lines and full sentences, and he liked you to remember that your English was not one of them. "Good morning, Mr. Dominic," you said softly as he descended the staircase, phone in hand. He didn't look up. "Morning," he murmured, before adding, almost as an afterthought, "Still working on those R's, huh?" "Moaning, Grace, not mawning." Laughter flickered across his assistant's face behind him. You smiled the way women do when silence is safer than pride. Each correction was a pin, small, sharp, forgettable. Until the skin remembers where everyone landed. You continued your rounds through the house. The library still smelled of cedar and arrogance. A server room door blinked with security lights. One of the only locked rooms in the mansion. Strange, for a man who claimed he had nothing to hide. At breakfast, Dominic's conversation with his CFO spilled through the open kitchen. "Government contracts delicate," the man said. "African division wants assurances, language barriers, documentation delays." Dominic snorted. "Tell them we're saving them from themselves. If they can't read a manual, that's not my fault." The words struck like ice water. You lowered your gaze, spoon trembling slightly. He didn't notice. People like him rarely did. By noon, the household hummed with invisible choreography. Gardeners outside, cooks clattering, phones buzzing with orders. You paused by the tall window overlooking the reflecting pool. For a moment, the surface showed two worlds, the sky above and the one beneath. You wondered which you lived in. The oddities had been growing. Unmarked packages arriving at night. Dominic taking calls in hushed code. The server room's blue light pulsing long after midnight. And now, the slip, government contract. You had heard those words before, years ago, in conference rooms where flags hung beside translators' booths. Back then, your voice had carried presidents' messages across languages, until a mission went wrong, until silence became safer. "Grace," Dominic's voice snapped you back. "Don't daydream on company time." "Sorry, sir." He eyed you. "You've been here, what, 6 months? Try to keep up. Americans value efficiency." "Yes, sir." You straightened, the accent thickening on purpose now, a shield disguised as weakness. He returned to his call. You caught a phrase, "data transfer protocol." "DC clearance." Something cold moved in your stomach. That evening, when the house finally quieted, you lingered near the corridor outside his office. Through the cracked door, Dominic's voice sharpened. "No, I don't want the agency involved. The files move tonight. The Africans will sign. They always do." Silence. "Then, what about the interpreter?" A pause. He laughed. "Please." "She cleans floors." You stepped back, heart thudding. The files. The government. The interpreter. You. The phone clicked. Footsteps approached. You slipped into the shadows beside the column, breath thin as thread. Dominic passed by, muttering to himself, phone still glowing. The blue light caught the edge of your face. You turned away just in time. Later, in the maid's quarters, you stared at your reflection in the small cracked mirror above the sink. The woman staring back looked tired but steady. You whispered to her in Swahili first, then English. Stay small. Watch everything. Because you had learned long ago that survival wasn't about volume. It was about timing. When you returned the laundry basket to the corridor, you noticed something unusual. A manila envelope lying half-slid under the office door. The seal bore an insignia you hadn't seen in years. The faint outline of an eagle and the words Executive Communications. Confidential. Your breath caught. You knelt, fingertips grazing it, pulse echoing in your ears. Then you heard footsteps again, Dominic's unmistakable stride. You straightened, forcing calm, the envelope still half under the door. He stopped nearby, muttering, "Tomorrow we finalize. No leaks. If this blows up, the president himself couldn't save us." The name struck like thunder. The president. You stepped back into the shadows, unseen, heart pounding with old instincts awakening. You weren't supposed to hear that, and you didn't yet understand what it meant, but something vast had just shifted. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills as if the sky itself knew the storm had begun. Grace overhears. Dominic mentioned the president in connection with a secret government deal she once translated for years ago. The morning arrived in polished silence, but the air had changed. The mansion felt heavier, as if the walls had overheard what Grace had, and were now keeping their own counsel. She moved through the halls with practiced calm, yet every sense was sharpened. Every footstep weighed, every whisper memorized. She had learned, long ago, that power leaves traces not only in words, but in the way silence follows after them. Downstairs, the staff murmured in the kitchen. Rosa, the youngest maid, stood near the counter, eyes wet. The head butler, Mr. Quinn, was speaking in his clipped, formal tone, the one that made even apologies sound like judgments. "I'm sorry, Miss Rosa. Mr. Voss says we're overstaffed. You'll be paid through the week." Grace froze. Rosa had been with them since winter, quiet, gentle, never late. Rosa wiped her eyes. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" Quinn hesitated. "Mr. Voss said it's not about you. He just prefers someone with better presentation for the front-facing roles." Grace's jaw tightened. That phrase, better presentation, was Dominic's polite mask for everything he didn't want to say aloud. When Rosa left the room, Grace followed, pressing a folded note of bus fare into her palm. Rosa shook her head. "You'll get in trouble," Grace smiled faintly. "Sometimes trouble is the only thing that keeps us human." She watched the girl go, her small suitcase bumping across the marble floor like an echo of every quiet injustice that had come before. That afternoon, Dominic prepared for a business dinner. He liked to host these evenings, polished showcases where power traded smiles across wine glasses. Grace helped set the table, her movements deliberate, her thoughts elsewhere. The dining room glittered under crystal light. 12 guests, all in tailored suits, all men except for one woman, a senator's aide, sharp-eyed and attentive. Dominic stood at the head of the table, voice smooth and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, Tonight we celebrate a partnership that will redefine global connectivity. Our technology will bring efficiency to places that have never known it. Polite laughter followed. Champagne glasses clinked. Grace poured water behind him, invisible but listening. We'll begin pilot programs across several African nations, Dominic continued. Translators are a challenge, of course, but we're working with local teams to simplify communication. The aide raised an eyebrow. Simplify? Dominic smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. Let's just say we're teaching them how to speak our language. A few guests chuckled. Grace's hand trembled slightly, water spilling over the rim of the glass. Dominic turned, his tone light but cutting. Careful, Grace. We don't want a flood at dinner, do we? A ripple of amusement moved around the table. Her cheeks burned, but she only bowed her head. Apologies, sir. He returned to his speech, unaware that the smallest crack had already appeared. Not in her, but in the illusion of his control. After the guests left and the dishes were cleared, Grace gathered the linens. The senator's aide lingered by the door, pretending to check her phone. When their eyes met, the woman gave a subtle nod. Not pity, but recognition. Something in Grace stirred. There were still witnesses in this world, even if they stayed silent. Later that night, as she carried the silver trays to storage, a faint rustle drew her attention. The wastebasket beside the office desk overflowed with crumpled papers. On top lay a folder marked DHA clearance. Her pulse quickened. She shouldn't. She knew that. But she also knew what secrets sound like when they whisper too loudly to ignore. She lifted the folder, smoothing the creases. Inside were printed memos, half-burned from a shredded corner, each page stamped with the insignia she had glimpsed before. The faint outline of an eagle, and the letters U.S. Executive Communications. One sheet carried her name. She froze. Grace Mwende, interpreter, clearance level 3, archived. Her throat tightened. That record had been sealed years ago, when she'd left the diplomatic service after the Nairobi conference scandal, when her team had been blamed for a mistranslation that cost lives. Someone had erased her file back then. And now, here it was, on Dominic Voss's desk. What was he doing with it? The door creaked. Grace slid the folder under her apron and turned. Quinn stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. You shouldn't be here, Miss Mwende. Her heart pounded. I was cleaning, sir. He studied her for a moment, then sighed. Be careful what you touch. Mr. Voss doesn't like curious employees. He stepped aside, letting her pass. But as she brushed by, he murmured low enough that only she could hear. Some things in this house aren't meant to be found. That night, Grace sat in the dim light of her small room. The folder spread before her like a ghost from another life. The pages confirmed what she suspected. Dominic's company had secured a contract under the Department of Humanitarian Affairs, a deal involving encrypted software for aid coordination. But one memo stood out. All interpreter data must remain classified until confirmation from Washington. Do not disclose operational identities. EO Directive, February 12th. Her clearance had been inactive since 2019. Yet here it was, active again, as if she had never left. Someone had reinstated her credentials without telling her, and whoever had done that had placed her directly in Dominic's orbit. The next morning, the world outside looked normal again, but inside the house, the rhythm faltered. Dominic was tense, pacing on a phone call near the balcony. I told you she's harmless, he hissed. A maid, nothing more. Then, a pause. No, she doesn't know. How could she? Grace paused mid-step, a tray in her hands. She? The conversation was about her. Dominic turned suddenly. "Grace, coffee, please." She brought it, steady and silent. He took it without a glance, resuming the call. "Yes, the President's envoy will call this afternoon. Make sure the files are routed through my server." The name again, President. The pattern repeated. Every piece slid closer to something vast, something dangerous. That evening, Grace stepped outside for a breath of air. The city lights glittered in the distance, but the estate sat isolated, surrounded by dark woods. The wind carried faint static, a hum, like an electrical pulse. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" Static, then a distorted voice. "Grace Mwendi." "Stop asking questions," she froze. "Who is this?" The line clicked. Silence. Her hands trembled as she lowered the phone. The threat wasn't subtle. It was a promise. She turned toward the mansion, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. For the first time, she realized she wasn't simply serving inside that house. She was being watched by it. And somewhere, behind all the polished glass and perfect smiles, someone already knew she had found the folder. She moved quickly, heart racing, returning to her room. The folder was gone. Her drawer stood open. Her few belongings disturbed. Only one object remained untouched on her pillow. A single envelope. Inside was a note, printed in neat, formal type. "Your past belongs to us now. Stop looking, or people get hurt." Her eyes widened. The words were identical to the threats she had translated years ago during the Nairobi operation. Same phrasing, same syntax, the same invisible hand. She dropped the paper, chest tight. This wasn't just Dominic's arrogance anymore. This was bigger, coordinated, planned. And if her past had resurfaced here, in this house, then it wasn't by accident. Outside, lightning flashed again over the estate, reflecting in the glass walls like fractures in a mirror. Grace stood still, pulse drumming in her ears. For years, she had believed silence kept her safe. But now silence itself was the trap. She looked at the note one last time, then tore it in half. The sound was small, but it marked the moment she stopped being afraid. From that night on, she would stop cleaning up other people's messes. She would start uncovering them, and somewhere deep in the mansion, a light flickered, the motion sensor in the server room blinking red, as if acknowledging her decision. Grace receives the anonymous threat. Stop looking, or people get hurt. The web has officially tightened around her. By dawn, the mansion felt colder, not the kind of chill that came from weather, but the kind that seeped from secrets. Grace moved through her chores as usual, polishing, dusting, folding, each motion measured, each breath deliberate. She had slept barely an hour. The note's words still echoed inside her. "Your past belongs to us now." Every sound in the house now carried meaning. The faint click of security cameras rotating above the corridor. The whisper of Dominic's office door closing before a call. The low hum of the server room, sealed and pulsing like a hidden heart. She kept her head low, but her eyes open. At breakfast, Dominic's assistant, Lydia, hovered near him, tapping away on a tablet. "Sir, the government liaison rescheduled for noon," she said. Dominic frowned. "Fine. Have the files encrypted and ready." His gaze flicked to Grace. "And make sure the help stays clear of the East Wing today." Grace nodded silently, her hand steadying a silver tray. When he and Lydia left, she lingered in the hallway, listening to the echo of their conversation fade down the marble corridor. East Wing. That's where the server room sat, and where the blinking red light had flashed last night. She waited until the sound of Dominic's car receded down the driveway. Then she turned. If he didn't want her there was a reason. The East Wing was colder than the rest of the house. The walls here were matte, lined with black panels, the air faintly humming with electricity. She reached the end of the hallway, where a keypad guarded a steel door. She had watched Dominic type the code once before, in passing, his fingers moving fast, but not too fast. 3 numbers. Pause. 2. Pause. 1. A rhythm, not a pattern. Grace closed her eyes, replaying the motion in her mind like a melody. Then she tried beep, beep, beep. The light flickered from red to green. The door clicked open. Inside, the room glowed blue with screens. Racks of servers blinked like constellations. The air smelled faintly of ozone and dust, the scent of data. She stepped closer, heart pounding. The monitors displayed maps, communications logs, encryption windows. On one screen, a file name caught her eye. Project Dawn. U.S. Aid Network. Prototype. She opened the folder. Pages of data unfurled. Shipments, transfer routes, diplomatic codes. But something was wrong. The listed recipients were hospitals, schools, relief centers. Yet the cargo descriptions read, biometric scanners, surveillance drones, remote tracking units. This wasn't humanitarian aid. It was surveillance. Grace scrolled faster, piecing the puzzle together. Dominic's company wasn't donating technology. It was embedding data trackers into developing nations' infrastructure. And the authorization came from someone in the Department of Communications, under a familiar name she hadn't seen since. Nairobi? Director Halverson. The same official who'd buried her translation career. Her pulse quickened. So that was it. She wasn't placed here by chance. She was being used again. Footsteps. Grace froze. Dominic's voice, closer than she expected. I told you, Lydia, I don't care what the liaison thinks. We send the data tonight. She shut the screen, heart pounding. There was nowhere to hide but behind the rack of servers. She pressed herself into the shadows as Dominic entered, his phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I know the clearance code, he said sharply. I'm not paying millions just to be babysat by bureaucrats. The president will see results, not excuses. Her throat went dry. He wasn't bluffing. He was in direct contact with Washington. But which side was he on? He turned toward the console, fingers flying across the keys. Then, without warning, his tone softened. Oh, Lydia, one more thing. Keep an eye on the maid. She's been attentive lately. Grace's stomach dropped. She hadn't fooled him after all. The moment he left, she slipped out the side exit, barely breathing. By evening, the entire staff seemed uneasy. Whispered conversations broke off when she entered a room. Quinn avoided her eyes. The cooks stopped joking. Grace felt it, a pressure closing in. While serving dinner that night, she caught Dominic watching her. Not with disdain this time, but with calculation. Grace, he said suddenly. Tell me, you've lived in many places, haven't you? Her hand paused mid-air. Some, sir. Kenya, right? Beautiful country, full of promise. Though, perhaps, lacking structure. His tone was mild, but the message was not. A warning cloaked in civility. Yes, sir, she said, forcing a smile. But even the smallest country can teach the largest lessons. His eyebrow twitched, the faintest crack in his composure. She left the room before he could reply. Later that night, she sat alone in the laundry room, the hum of the dryers masking the sound of her shaking hands. She needed proof, something tangible to expose the truth. She pulled the folded folder from her apron pocket, the one she'd rescued before it vanished entirely. Hidden inside was a flash drive, small and silver, tucked between the pages like a secret heartbeat. Where had it come from? She didn't remember putting it there. Someone must have slipped it in. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time she answered immediately. "Who are you?" she whispered. A calm voice responded. "I'm a friend, Miss Muendi. You're not alone." "Then tell me why they're doing this." "Because power doesn't tolerate witnesses," the voice said. "You're getting close. But if you want the truth, go to the old gate at midnight. Bring the drive." The line went dead. The clock struck 12. The mansion was still. Grace slipped outside, cold air cutting through her uniform. She followed the gravel path toward the iron gates. Flashlight dimmed. A figure waited beyond the fence, half hidden in shadow. "Grace Muendi?" She hesitated. "Who sent you?" "I used to work for the same people you did," the man said. "Nairobi, I know what they did to you." Her grip tightened around the flash drive. "Why now?" "Because Halvorson's deal isn't charity, it's control. And Dominic Voss is just the face they chose to blame when it falls apart." Grace's heart pounded. "Then why am I here?" The man looked over her shoulder toward the mansion. "Because you're the only one with clearance left to unlock the real files." Before she could speak, headlights flashed across the trees. A black SUV barreled down the driveway. "Go!" the man hissed. "They're monitoring the gate." A gunshot cracked through the night. Grace ducked, the sound shattering the stillness. The man fell to the ground, clutching his shoulder. "Run!" he gasped. She hesitated only a second before sprinting back toward the mansion, the flash drive clutched in her fist. Tires screeched behind her. Voices shouted. She burst through the service door, slamming it shut, chest heaving. The mansion's alarms began to wail. Dominic's voice echoed from upstairs. "Security breach! Lock every door!" She hid behind the kitchen island, breath ragged, as armed guards swept through the halls. The flash drive burned like a secret in her palm. Her phone buzzed again, a single text from the unknown number. "You've been seen. Don't go to the police. The truth isn't what you think." She stared at the screen, pulse hammering. Nothing made sense anymore. Everyone seemed to know who she was. Except her. Outside, sirens approached, blue lights flashing against the glass walls. Dominic shouted orders into his radio, furious, desperate, and Grace, crouched in the shadows, realized something terrifying. The man who had mocked her didn't actually control the game. He was trapped in it, too. Grace's secret meeting ends in an ambush. She barely escapes. Now, both she and Dominic are targets of a larger conspiracy. The mansion roared with chaos. Alarms blared, red lights pulsed down the hallways, and somewhere in the distance, the heavy echo of steel doors sealing reverberated like a war drum. Grace pressed her back against the pantry wall, heart slamming against her ribs. The flash drive felt hot in her palm, as though it knew it was the reason for all this. Boots thundered past the door. She held her breath. "Clear the south wing," a voice barked. "She's still inside," the maid. That's how they described her. Not the witness, not the woman with the truth, just the maid. Grace's chest tightened. The discrimination she had swallowed for months, the condescension, the dismissive tone, the invisible boundaries of status, now burned into something else. Anger sharpened her fear. She couldn't keep running. She had to turn this around. She moved when the hallway emptied, slipping through shadows, ducking beneath security cameras. She knew the mansion better than anyone. Every blind spot, every squeaky tile, every vent where whispers carried. The only person who might still be able to help her was the one man she distrusted most. Dominic Voss. If the warning was true, if he was being used, then both of them were pawns in someone else's game. She needed to know which side of the board he stood on. Dominic's office door was open. He stood by the window, shouting into a phone, his face pale with fury. "What do you mean, classified? I own the patents. You can't just—" He stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing as he spotted her in the reflection. "Grace." She stepped inside slowly. "We need to talk." He hung up without a word, then turned. His gaze flicked to her hands, then to the flashing red lights outside. "You did this, didn't you?" "I did nothing you didn't start," she said quietly. "But you need to hear me out." "I don't have time for—" "You don't have anyone else who'll tell you the truth." The silence that followed was a thin thread stretched between them. Dominic's jaw worked. "Go on." She placed the flash drive on his desk. "This was hidden in your company's aid files. Someone inside is using your project to install surveillance infrastructure. They've done it before, overseas. Now they're using your name to cover it." He looked skeptical, but there was a tremor in his expression she hadn't seen before. Doubt. "Show me," he said finally. She nodded and slid the drive into his console. The screen blinked to life. And then, one by one, files began to load. Shipment records, approval chains, satellite coordinates. Each line of data another nail in the coffin. Dominic's composure cracked. This isn't possible. Halvorsen told me that it was humanitarian outreach," Grace finished. "They said the same to the Kenyan ministry when I worked as a translator." Months later, hundreds of journalists were tracked and arrested using those same systems. He looked at her, not with contempt, but horror. "I was blacklisted for speaking out," she continued, voice steady, "branded a liar. And when I came here, I realized your company's Project Dawn matched their blueprints exactly." Dominic sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "You're saying I've been laundering surveillance equipment across borders?" "Not you," Grace said. "Them. You were the face, the money, and the name. But they need you gone now that you've served your purpose." The intercom crackled suddenly. Lydia's voice, calm but urgent. "Sir, the authorities are outside. They want you to surrender the system access keys. They're accusing you of unauthorized international espionage." Dominic's head snapped up. "They're what?" Grace's pulse spiked. "You can't go out there." "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do," she snapped. "If you walk into that trap, you'll disappear. The truth will vanish with you, and they'll make me the scapegoat." Dominic stared at her, breathing hard. "You think I trust you?" "No," she said. "But you trust power, and right now, the only power you have left is the truth, and the person who found it." He hesitated. For a moment, the titan of industry looked more like a lost man. Then slowly he nodded. "What do we do?" Grace exhaled. "We run, but not aimlessly. There's one person who can expose this. A journalist I knew before everything collapsed. She owes me her life." Dominic frowned. And you're sure she's still alive? Grace's eyes hardened. She'd better be. They moved quickly. Grace led him through the back corridors, past the kitchens and out toward the maintenance tunnel that connected the mansion to the old greenhouse, a forgotten escape route built for emergencies. Outside, blue and red lights washed over the trees. Helicopters thudded overhead. Dominic looked shaken. "They're not here for me, are they?" Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. The further they went, the darker it grew. The tunnel's air was damp, the walls lined with pipes that hummed faintly. Their footsteps echoed like ghosts. Halfway through, a metallic clang rang behind them. Dominic turned. "What was that?" Grace froze. Another sound, a soft scuff. Then another. Someone was following them. She gestured toward the far end of the tunnel. "Go!" He hesitated. "What about you? I'll stall them. Go!" Dominic hesitated only a second longer before running. Grace turned toward the approaching footsteps, crouching low behind a junction pipe. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The light from a flashlight swept across the tunnel wall, and there he was. Quinn, the butler. But his uniform was gone. He was dressed in tactical gear, earpiece glinting, pistol drawn. "Grace," he said evenly, "you shouldn't have done this." Her throat went dry. "You work for them. I always have. You were a liability from day one." Dominic was never supposed to find out. Grace took a step back. "If you shoot me, the files die with me. They're encrypted under my ID," Quinn smiled faintly. "That's why we're not killing you yet." He raised his weapon, and then the tunnel exploded in light. Dominic had doubled back, wielding a heavy steel pipe. The blow sent the gun clattering across the floor. "Run!" he shouted. Grace grabbed the flash drive and sprinted toward the exit, Dominic close behind. Bullets ricocheted off the tunnel walls as Quinn recovered, shouting into his comms. They burst out into the night, stumbling through overgrown vines and shattered glass. The greenhouse loomed before them, ghostly, half-collapsed, glowing faintly under the moonlight. Dominic leaned against a broken pillar, panting. "Where now?" Grace looked out toward the forest road. "We find the journalist. She's our only chance." Dominic nodded, then froze, staring past her. Grace turned. Through the mist, a black drone hovered silently, its camera lens focusing on them like an unblinking eye. Then a voice crackled from its speaker. Calm, familiar, and cold. "Grace Mwendi, Dominic Voss, you've both become liabilities. Do not resist." Grace's blood turned to ice. She recognized the voice. Director Halverson. Grace and Dominic are cornered by Halverson's surveillance drones. Their identities exposed, their alliance now inevitable. The city skyline stretched like a glittering trap beneath them as Grace and Dominic climbed into the old journalist's safe house. The building was nondescript, tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a laundromat. But to Grace, it was a fortress. Every creaking floorboard, every cracked window told a story of secrets hidden and truths preserved. Inside, the journalist, Marissa Lorne, greeted them with wide, cautious eyes. "I didn't think you'd make it out alive," she said, closing the door behind them. Grace held up the flash drive. "We've got the proof. Every illegal transfer, every falsified signature, it's all here. Halverson's entire operation." Marissa nodded, reaching for her laptop. "If this goes public, Dominic, it'll ruin you." Dominic froze. For the first time, the veneer of control slipped. "I don't care," he said, voice tight. "They've been using me. I want justice." Grace's jaw tightened. "Justice." She had waited years for this word to matter. Marissa worked quickly, decrypting the files while Grace and Dominic went through the documents. Shipment logs, encrypted emails, travel manifests. Every line pointed back to Halverson. The level of deception was staggering, but tangible. Every file they touched was a nail in the coffin of Halverson's carefully constructed web. Dominic leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I always thought my mistakes were mine alone," he muttered. "But I was a pawn. And now we expose them." Grace's eyes narrowed. A pawn, with a chance to turn the board. By morning, they were ready. The files had been transferred to multiple secure channels. Marissa would handle the leak to the press, while Grace and Dominic planned their confrontation with Halverson. It felt like victory. Clean, precise, within reach. Grace allowed herself a small smile. Finally. But it didn't last. Dominic returned to his office to gather his own records. Contracts, correspondences, internal logs. Grace stayed behind, monitoring communications from Marissa's laptop. A soft ping startled her. An incoming encrypted message from an unknown sender. "You think you have won? Think again. Everything you hold is a lie." Her stomach tightened. She read it twice. There was no signature. Only a warning. Grace glanced toward the office door. Dominic was alone inside, flipping through contracts. He didn't notice her watching, didn't see the subtle tremor in her hands as she realized the message wasn't bluff. Someone else was inside the house. Dominic emerged from the office moments later, a thick folder clutched to his chest. "Grace," he said, "look at this. I found additional correspondence. Contracts that were never logged in the main system." She leaned over the table. The emails were detailed, coded instructions, shipments routed through shell corporations, references to the flash drive. To her. "She's watching you," Grace said quietly, pointing to the anomalies. "They know who holds the evidence, whoever sent the first note. They've embedded observers inside the operation. Maybe even the press we're trusting." Dominic froze, turning the pages as a cold realization settled on him. "You mean Halverson has eyes everywhere?" Grace nodded. "And if we act now, they'll manipulate it to make you look like the culprit." He exhaled slowly. "Then what do we do?" "Wait," she said. "We need confirmation. We can't confront anyone yet. One wrong move, and it's all over." Hours later, Marissa called. "The files are staged for release," she said. "They'll go live in 30 minutes. Grace's stomach dropped. 30 minutes? Are you sure? Halverson could intercept. They're encrypted, yes. But there's no time for subtlety anymore." Dominic clenched his fists. "We've waited years for this. We can't hesitate now." Grace stared at him, hesitated herself. She knew the truth. The setup looked perfect, but it felt too neat. Halvorsen wasn't a sloppy adversary, and no adversary left this much evidence willingly. A cold thought struck her. This isn't victory. It's a trap. The broadcast went live. Marissa's screen displayed breaking news. Dominic Voss implicated in international espionage. Shipments of surveillance tech routed under the guise of humanitarian aid. Grace watched as Halverson's fingerprints became invisible, leaving Dominic exposed. The files had been twisted. The evidence they had relied on had been misinterpreted. or deliberately altered. Dominic's face went pale. What? What is this? Grace shook her head. They've manipulated the release. We thought we controlled the narrative, but someone added layers we didn't see. Messages flooded Marissa's feed. Journalists questioning Dominic's motives, government officials denouncing him. Every move they made to protect him only amplified the perception of guilt. Dominic's fury was raw. We were supposed to win. We had the proof. Why did this happen? Grace swallowed, heart racing. Because you were never the target. You were the bait. And now they've set the stage to take both of us down. Suddenly, a knock at the safe house door. Grace and Dominic froze. Who is it? Dominic whispered. Police? Marissa muttered. The door rattled. A deep voice called, Open up, federal agents. We're taking you in. Dominic's hand went to the flash drive in his pocket. Grace's mind raced. They couldn't walk out. The narrative had been flipped. The evidence that was supposed to save them now made them look guilty. She grabbed his arm. Back door, now. They slipped into the alley behind the building, rain slicking the cobblestones. Lights flashed in the distance, patrol cars converging. They ducked into the shadows, hearts pounding, lungs burning. Halfway down the street, Dominic stopped abruptly. Grace, he gasped. They knew exactly where we'd go. How? She glanced behind them. Another car turned the corner, headlights cutting through the darkness. They've been tracking the drive all along, she said. We underestimated them. Dominic cursed under his breath. I thought we had the upper hand. Grace's jaw tightened. You thought. That's the key word. We don't act on assumptions. We act on facts. The facts that we control. But before she could plan the next step, a figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the alley. Tall, dressed in black, a face obscured by the hood. Stop, the voice said. Calm, certain, unyielding. Grace's heart froze. The figure raised a hand, holding a phone, displaying a live feed of Dominic and Grace running. You have been seen, the voice said, and you will go no further until you answer for what you took. Dominic's face paled. Halverson. Grace looked at the stranger, but the hooded figure didn't move closer, only waited, measuring. The flash drive in her hand felt heavier than ever. The world had shifted overnight. What had seemed like victory was nothing more than a single move in a much larger game. And the players? They had only just begun to reveal themselves. Grace and Dominic realized their supposed victory is a trap. Halverson and unknown allies have anticipated every move, leaving them cornered and vulnerable. Rain hammered the city streets, turning the alleyways into rivers of reflected light. Grace pressed herself against the brick wall, shivering, the flash drive clenched tightly in her fist. Every shadow seemed to pulse with movement. Every distant siren sounded like a hunt closing in. Dominic leaned beside her, chest heaving. For the first time he looked more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. The polished, untouchable billionaire had become human, terrified, cornered, and desperate. They've anticipated everything, he whispered. Every route, every contact, every move. It's like we were never in control at all. Grace's jaw tightened. We weren't. Not yet. Her mind raced, recalling every detail of the safe house, Marissa's encrypted files, and the anomalies in the broadcast. There had to be a pattern, a clue they had missed. Somewhere, a thread to pull. Hours earlier, the flash drive had felt like salvation. Now it felt like a millstone. The evidence they had believed would free them had been twisted into chains. Dominic sank to his knees beside her. Grace, maybe we should surrender. Maybe this is bigger than us. She shook her head. No, giving up never fixed anything. I've survived worse than this, Dominic, because I learned to see what others ignore. He looked at her, skepticism and fear in his eyes. And what do you see now? Grace took a deep breath. I see one mistake we made. We assumed Halverson's plan was linear. We assumed he wanted to frame us first. But what if the real goal was to distract us, to get us looking one way while the truth moved somewhere else entirely? Dominic frowned. The truth is somewhere else? Yes, she said, voice steady. Think back to Nairobi. Think about the files. Who benefits if we fail publicly, if all our attention is elsewhere? The answer isn't Halverson alone. Dominic's eyes widened. Someone else is pulling the strings, Grace nodded. And that someone's been in the shadows the whole time. Watching. Waiting. They want the flash drive, not for what's on it, but for what it represents. Leverage. Control. They ducked into a narrow side street, rain soaking through Grace's coat. Every corner seemed to hide a new threat. Every sound made her flinch. Yet amid the fear, clarity formed. The journalist, she said. Marissa is supposed to be our ally. But if the broadcast was tampered with before it went live, then maybe she's compromised. Or maybe the files we saw weren't the originals. Dominic shook his head. You mean we trusted the wrong evidence? Grace looked him in the eyes. Exactly. We were chasing shadows. And shadows don't win wars. The people controlling the light do. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Then what do? We go back to the beginning, Grace said. To the place where all the threads first intersected. The files, the contracts, the folder in your office. There's one piece we overlooked. One piece that will tell us everything we need to know. They returned to Dominic's mansion under the cover of darkness. Every window was dark, yet they knew from last night's encounter that the surveillance hadn't stopped. Whoever was watching them had to believe they were gone. Grace led him to the server room in the East Wing, the heart of the operation. The blinking lights of the monitors reflected off her determined eyes. I'll decrypt the original files myself, she said. If Halverson wanted to mislead us, he wouldn't have destroyed the originals. They're still here. And one of them will show us the true chain of command. Dominic watched her work, tense but trusting. For the first time, he wasn't leading. He was following. Hours passed. Rain continued to beat against the windows. Grace's fingers danced across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls, decoding encryptions. Sweat beaded her brow. Every second felt like a lifetime. And then she found it. A single email buried deep within the system. Addressed to Director Halverson but copied to a mysterious secondary address. Executive Project. Dawn Shadow Corp. global. Grace's heart skipped a beat. Shadow Corp. The name was familiar. She had seen it once before in a minor footnote in the Nairobi files. A shell organization, invisible on paper, powerful in reality. She traced the IP addresses, following the digital trail across servers in 3 continents. The pattern was precise, coordinated, malicious. Grace exhaled, a mixture of relief and terror. "This is it," she whispered. "This is who's really behind everything." Halverson was just the mask. Shadow Corp has been pulling the strings, and they've been using both of us to hide it. Dominic leaned over her shoulder. "So, the victory we thought we had, it was never real." "No," Grace said, her voice calm despite the storm around them. "It was a setup. But now we finally see the board." A sudden beep startled them. The monitors flickered. Grace froze. "They know we're here." Before Dominic could react, a new message appeared on the main screen. Large red letters flashing, "Stop now, or face consequences." Dominic's face paled. "They're threatening us." Grace didn't flinch. "No, they're trying to scare us. Fear is their weapon. But now we know the truth. And the truth is our weapon, too." She looked at the flash drive, then back at Dominic. "We can't fight them blindly anymore. We need to turn their own game against them. But we can't do it alone. Who do we trust?" he asked, voice low. Grace's lips pressed together. For years, she had trusted no one. Yet now, standing in the eye of the storm, she realized there was one person they had overlooked. Someone who had known the full extent of Shadow Corp's operations all along, yet remained silent until the timing was right. "Someone inside the mansion," she said. "Someone who knows what Halverson and Shadow Corp are planning. And who's willing to help us." Dominic nodded, though tension still etched his face. "Then we find them, before it's too late." Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle, but the storm inside the mansion was just beginning. Grace stood, flash drive in hand, heart steady. She had reached her lowest point, stripped of allies, exposed to betrayal and threats. But she had one advantage: knowledge. And knowledge, she knew, was power. Somewhere in the mansion, a shadow stirred. Grace couldn't see it yet, but she felt it. The pieces were moving, and now she was ready to move with them. The flash drive pulsed like a heartbeat in her hand, signaling a new beginning. Grace discovers a hidden lead pointing to an insider ally within the mansion, potentially turning the tide. But the mansion is still under surveillance, and Halverson's agents are closing in. The mansion loomed like a silent predator as Grace and Dominic crept through the east wing, flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. Every shadow seemed to watch them, every creak of floorboard echoing in the cold, still night. Grace's mind raced. She had located the pattern in Shadow Corp's network, traced it back to someone inside the mansion. Whoever this insider was, they were taking incredible risks. They had to be trusted, or the plan would collapse before it even began. "Are you sure about this?" Dominic whispered, voice low, tense. "If we're wrong, we're dead before we even reach them." Grace's jaw tightened. "I've never been more certain. And, if we wait, Shadow Corp will close the loop, and there won't be a next time." They reached the library, one of the mansion's oldest rooms, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. A faint light flickered beneath the heavy oak door. "Inside," Grace whispered. They stepped cautiously through the door. A figure sat at the desk, back to them, typing rapidly on a laptop. The screen glowed in the dim light, casting long shadows across the floor. Grace cleared her throat. "We know who you are." The figure froze. Slowly, they turned, revealing a familiar face. Quinn. Dominic stiffened. "The butler." "I thought—" Grace held up a hand. "Not the same Quinn. Shadow Corp replaced the one we trusted with a decoy months ago. This is the original." The man, the real Quinn, nodded, his eyes sharp, aware. "I've been waiting for you to realize the truth." "Why help us now?" Grace asked, suspicion tempered by the knowledge that they had no other option. Quinn gestured to the laptop. "Because the decoy they planted is about to blow everything up. Halverson and Shadow Corp are moving tonight. And the mansion will be the epicenter of a trap designed to remove all witnesses. Including you." Dominic swallowed hard. "And the files? The flash drive? They're essential," Quinn said. "The drive contains the only copy of the true logs. Everything Halverson wants destroyed is on it. But if they intercept you before you reach the network hub, they'll rewrite history, make it look like you orchestrated the leaks yourself." Grace's stomach tightened. They were deeper in the game than she'd realized. But finally, they had someone on the inside. "Follow me," Quinn said, moving through a secret passage behind the library shelves. The walls were narrow and dark, but it led them safely past the surveillance cameras they had noted earlier. Dominic followed silently, trust slowly building in the heat of the crisis. Grace stayed close to Quinn, every step measured, listening to the faint hum of electricity around them. Finally, they reached the server hub, the mansion's nerve center. The room was massive, walls lined with racks of blinking lights. Shadows danced across the panels. "This is it," Quinn said. "Every encrypted communication, every shipment log, everything they tried to hide." Grace approached the central console. Her hands moved quickly, guided by months of experience decoding and translating hidden data. The flash drive slid into the port. The screens flickered. Then, one by one, files began to reveal the truth. Dominic leaned over, squinting at the first lines of code. This proves everything. Halvorsen orchestrated the contracts. Shadow Corp handled the logistics, and the decoy Quinn. He was their inside agent to keep us distracted." Grace nodded. "Exactly. But look here." She tapped a folder. "These logs, they show communications from Halvorsen to a high-ranking government official we didn't even suspect. This is the missing piece." The room went silent for a moment. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them. Not only were Halvorsen and Shadow Corp behind the operation, but there were others, allies hidden in plain sight, complicit in the scheme. Dominic exhaled sharply. "So everyone we thought was helping. Some of them were against us all along." Grace's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes, and that's why we need to move quickly. If we broadcast this now, we can control the narrative before they can interfere." Suddenly, a siren wailed. The mansion's internal security. "They found us," Quinn muttered. "The decoy triggered a fail-safe. Halvorsen knew you were close." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Then we don't have time for subtlety." She hit a series of keys, sending the decrypted files to multiple secure channels. Journalists, government oversight bodies, international watchdogs. The screens lit up with confirmation messages. Delivered, received, acknowledged. Dominic exhaled, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "It's done?" Grace shook her head. "Not yet. The files are out, yes, but Halvorsen still has resources inside this house. We have to get out before they respond." Quinn gestured toward a service tunnel leading outside. This will get you clear of their immediate surveillance. After that, you'll have to stay mobile. They moved quickly, shadows blending with shadows. Grace's mind raced, calculating the risk, anticipating every step. As they reached the tunnel exit, a figure emerged in the doorway. Tall, composed, unmistakably authoritative. Halverson. Grace froze. Dominic stepped forward, face pale. "We're done running." Halverson's gaze swept over them, unyielding. "You really thought you could uncover everything and walk away?" Grace swallowed her fear. "We did what you couldn't stop. The files are out. The world knows the truth." A faint smile crossed Halverson's face. A predator acknowledging a worthy prey. The truth is never absolute. You see one side, one story. But the story I wrote is already halfway rewritten. Dominic clenched his fists. "We know the scheme. We know Shadow Corp. And we have proof of your manipulation. There's nowhere left to hide." Halverson's smile widened. "Perhaps. But the real question is, do you trust the proof you hold?" Grace's heart thudded. The files, the flash drive, the channels, everything they believed was controlled. Yet Halverson's words planted a seed of doubt. She looked at Dominic, then Quinn. "We either face him here, or we disappear and plan our next move. There's no middle ground," Dominic nodded. "Then we face him, together." Halverson tilted his head, as if considering their answer. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving a silence thick with tension. Grace exhaled slowly. For the first time, the mansion felt empty, yet charged with anticipation. The first real step in turning the game around had been taken. Quinn stepped beside her. "You've done well, but this is just the beginning." "The unmasking isn't over," Grace nodded. The files were out, the insider revealed, and the tide had shifted. But Halverson still controlled the larger battlefield. She looked at Dominic. "We've taken the first step. Now we finish the story, or they finish us." Dominic's hand brushed hers briefly. Not a touch of romance, but one of alliance, trust, and shared purpose. Grace clenched the flash drive. The night was far from over. The files have been sent, the insider revealed, and Halverson retreats. But a larger secret within Shadow Corp remains hidden, threatening everything Grace and Dominic have fought for. The newsroom buzzed like a storm as journalists scrambled to verify the files Grace had delivered. Screens across the city flickered with breaking news. Dominic Voss implicated in a massive surveillance conspiracy, yet simultaneously exonerated in internal communications, exposing Shadow Corp's deeper manipulations. The truth, at last, was fragmenting the narrative Halverson had controlled for months. Grace sat beside Marissa in the cramped office, eyes glued to the monitors. Each feed confirmed what she had feared and hoped. The evidence was reaching the right people, forcing officials to respond publicly. "Look at this," Marissa said, pointing to a live press conference. Government investigators detailed Shadow Corp's infiltration of international aid networks. They confirmed Dominic's unknowing involvement and, more importantly, highlighted the flash drive as the first undeniable proof of the conspiracy. Grace's pulse quickened. Every journalist's camera, every blinking live feed, became a magnifying glass illuminating the lies that had controlled their lives. Dominic stood behind her, stoic but tense. "So, they believe it? They understand what's really happening?" Grace nodded. "Half of them do. The other half is still skeptical. But the narrative has shifted, and once it shifts, it doesn't shift back easily. Dominic exhaled, rubbing his face. It's been months of running, hiding, guessing, and all along, the answers were in your hands. Grace looked down at the flash drive. The tiny device, once a source of fear, had become a beacon. "It wasn't just me," she said softly. "It was all of us working together. Marissa verifying, Quinn guiding, you acting when you had to. Every part mattered." The live broadcast cut to Halverson, seated in a private office, flanked by Shadow Corp executives. His calm, calculated demeanor had cracked ever so slightly. An imperceptible twitch in his jaw. A subtle narrowing of his eyes. Grace leaned closer. "Watch! He knows the narrative is collapsing, but he's already spinning the next layer." On screen, Halverson's voice was measured, almost soothing. "We regret that certain projects were misinterpreted. Our intentions were always aligned with national security. Any lapses were isolated, rogue actions by minor operatives." Dominic's jaw clenched. "Minor operatives? He's talking about us. Grace, they're trying to erase our role completely." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Let him try. The files are public. Everything Halverson is claiming is already contradicted. It's too late to spin the truth completely." The screen shifted to the mansion's internal cameras, previously manipulated by Shadow Corp. Grace watched as security footage, time-stamped and untouched, revealed the decoy Quinn moving through the mansion, planting evidence and triggering false alerts. There it was, undeniable proof of Shadow Corp's manipulation. The missing link that connected Halverson directly to the plan to frame Dominic. Marissa pointed at the screen. "This is it. The public is seeing him orchestrate the lie in real time, and the internal communications we released prove he's been controlling the narrative behind the scenes." Grace's lips pressed together. She felt a wave of vindication, but also a chill. The victory was near, but the storm of consequences was just beginning. Then an alert pinged on Marissa's laptop, an incoming encrypted video. Grace hesitated, hand hovering over the trackpad. The file was marked Shadow Corp Directive, Final Revelation. "Should we open it?" Dominic asked. Grace nodded. "We have to know exactly what we're up against." The video began. A deep, distorted voice narrated over images of maps, shipping containers, and international communications lines. The footage revealed the final layer of Shadow Corp's plan. Not just surveillance, but global manipulation of governments through data control, bribery, and infiltration. Grace felt a chill. The scale was staggering. Halvorsen had been a puppet himself, and the real mastermind, a shadowy figure only known as the Architect, was revealed. The Architect had been orchestrating the crisis from behind the scenes, using Halvorsen and Shadow Corp as instruments. Their goal wasn't just profit or influence, it was control over entire networks of political and social power. Dominic's voice was low, almost a whisper. "So we were never just fighting him. We were fighting the entire system he's built." Grace's jaw tightened. "Yes, and now everyone knows it. But they'll fight back." Outside the broadcast feeds, people began to react. Public officials called emergency meetings. International watchdogs mobilized. Social media erupted with discussions, debates, and outrage. Shadow Corp's front offices emptied, executives disappearing overnight. Halvorsen attempted to release statements to save face, but the truth was already too visible. Grace felt the weight of months of fear and running finally lift, replaced by adrenaline, urgency, and clarity. Every sleepless night, every calculated step, every risk had led to this moment. And yet, there was still one more secret. One more twist. The flash drive contained an additional hidden folder Grace had only discovered minutes ago. Project Dawn. Secret directives. Opening it revealed encrypted logs detailing who inside Halverson's inner circle had been loyal to the architect from the beginning. A list of names, dates, and operations. It wasn't just Halverson. There were players still at large, ready to move if the chaos continued. Grace looked at Dominic. We've exposed the first layer, but the fight isn't over. This is bigger than any of us imagined. Dominic's hand brushed hers. A brief, grounding contact in the eye of a storm. Then we finish it. Together. The final piece of the video feed revealed the most shocking truth. One of the people they had trusted from the start. Someone close, present at critical moments, had secretly been feeding information to the architect, ensuring Shadow Corp's plan stayed ahead of every countermeasure. Grace's chest tightened. It's someone in our circle, someone who's been helping us all along, but also betraying us. Dominic's face paled. Who? Grace shook her head. We don't know yet, but when we find out, it will change everything. Who we trust, how we act, and what the next steps are. The broadcast continued, revealing to the world the dual layers of deception. The public and private unmasking of Halverson, Shadow Corp, and the hidden manipulations. The truth was out, but the mansion, the city, and even their lives were still in danger. Grace clenched the flash drive, her eyes steely. The first wave of justice had been won, but the next battle, the one that would expose the architect, was just beginning. The public knows Halverson and Shadow Corp's manipulations, but a secret insider loyal to the architect remains at large, threatening everything Grace and Dominic have fought to expose. The city was awake in a different way now. Screens across every news outlet displayed the fall of Halverson and the exposure of Shadow Corp's manipulations. Public outrage burned bright. Officials were called to account. Corporate offices were raided, and international watchdogs moved in with unprecedented speed. Yet Grace and Dominic knew the surface chaos was only the beginning. They had won the first wave, but the deeper current, the architect, remained unseen, pulling strings from the shadows. They returned to the mansion, now eerily silent. The safe house that had once been a refuge felt hollow. Grace moved cautiously, every step measured. Dominic followed, his usual confidence tempered by months of being hunted. People are choosing sides fast, Grace said quietly, checking updates on her tablet. Some allies are revealing themselves, some betraying us. We have to act before the architect makes the next move. Dominic rubbed his jaw. I trusted too easily. I thought exposing Halverson would be enough. I didn't realize the real enemy was still invisible. Grace placed a hand on his arm. The real enemy doesn't matter if we don't act together. We're stronger than the sum of their plans. If we're smart, precise, and ruthless when we need to be. They were not alone for long. Quinn appeared, moving silently, carrying a stack of folders. The insider I mentioned has come forward, he said. They've been monitoring the architect's communications for months. They've identified key operatives still active, and their movements tonight matched the leaked directives. Dominic raised an eyebrow. And who is this insider? Quinn's lips pressed together. Someone you least expect. Someone who's been embedded in every operation you've been involved in. Someone close. Grace's eyes narrowed. Then we have to find them. Fast. They could undo everything we've done. Outside, the mansion grounds were no longer safe. Vehicles parked discreetly along the perimeter hinted at surveillance, operatives moving with the precision of a military strike team. Grace led the group to the mansion's old communications tower, a relic from the estate's original security system. From here, they could access Shadow Corp's remaining internal networks without exposing themselves to external monitoring. Dominic hesitated. This feels like stepping into the lion's den. Grace's lips curved in a faint, wry smile. That's exactly the point. They climbed the narrow metal stairs, reaching the top of the tower. The wind whipped through the open grates, and the city lights stretched below like a web. Quinn connected a secure terminal to the tower's network, bypassing firewalls and proxies. Lines of code scrolled rapidly. Every monitor displayed movements, communications, and financial transfers, the remnants of Shadow Corp's operations. And then a single name appeared repeatedly. Isabella Voss. Dominic froze. Isabella? My sister. Grace's eyes widened. She's been the insider. Every move, every piece of misinformation, every delayed response, it traces back to her. Dominic's hands shook. Why? Why would she do this? She's family. Quinn's voice was steady, almost clinical. The architect recruited her years ago. She believed in the cause. She thought the system needed control to prevent chaos. And she saw your involvement as the only way to accelerate it. Grace's stomach sank. We've been working with the enemy this whole time, and never suspected it. Dominic ran a hand through his hair, jaw tight. So every step I took, every risk I made, she was counting on it. Manipulating me. Grace's eyes hardened. Then it's time to confront her. No hesitation, no mercy for someone who's endangered countless lives. Meanwhile, below, Halverson had regrouped, now fully aware of the betrayal from his decoy agents and Shadow Corp executives. He watched as Isabella's movements synchronized with the architect's orders, realizing that his downfall had been accelerated by the very person he had considered an ally. Grace tapped into the mansion's internal intercom system. Isabella Voss, this is Grace Mundy. You've betrayed every trust, endangered every life, and now the truth is out. Meet us at the top of the communications tower. You don't have a choice. A pause. Then, through the speaker, Isabella's voice came, calm, almost eerily composed. You think you've won? She asked. You've uncovered Halverson, Shadow Corp, even the network. But you don't understand the game. The architect planned for this moment. You're still pieces in a much larger design. Grace clenched her fists. Then we become the players who rewrite the design. Come up here, Isabella. Face the consequences of your choices. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, footsteps echoed through the stairwell. Isabella appeared, tall and imposing, her expression unreadable. Dominic stepped forward. Isabella, why? She met his gaze without flinching. You wouldn't understand. The world isn't fair. People like Halverson, Shadow Corp, even you. You think influence can fix what's broken. But real control requires sacrifices. Grace's voice was sharp. Sacrifices? You endangered everyone. Children, innocents, families. You justified it with ideology. That's not control. That's destruction. Isabella's lips quirked into a faint, cold smile. You still don't get it. I did what was necessary. I protected the bigger picture. Dominic's jaw tightened. By betraying your own family? Her gaze flicked to the flash drive. You have that? You don't even know how fragile your victory really is. The architect's plan is far from over. Grace's eyes narrowed. Then we finish it. Tonight. The wind howled around them. The city below was alive with confusion, chaos, and exposure. Shadow Corp's structure was crumbling, but Isabella remained a wild card. A reminder that truth and justice were never absolute. Dominic stepped beside Grace. We do this together. No hesitation. Grace nodded, the weight of months of fear, betrayal, and pursuit compressing into clarity. We stop her. We stop the architect. And we finish the story. The three of them stood at the top of the communications tower, eyes locked in a tense standoff. Every secret, every deception, every betrayal had led to this point. The reckoning had arrived. Isabella Voss, revealed as the insider loyal to the architect, confronts Grace and Dominic at the top of the communications tower, threatening to undo everything they've fought for. The final confrontation is imminent. The wind whipped fiercely across the communications tower, tugging at coats and hair, carrying with it the tension of months of secrets, betrayals, and near-constant danger. Grace stood shoulder to shoulder with Dominic, the flash drive still secure in her hand, while Isabella faced them across the narrow platform. Below, the city pulsed with life, oblivious to the confrontation about to unfold. The neon lights shimmered off the rain-soaked streets like a fractured reflection of the chaos that had dominated the past weeks. Dominic stepped forward. It ends here, Isabella. No more games. Isabella's gaze was steady, calm, almost serene. Do you really believe it's that simple? Halvorsen, Shadow Corp, the decoys, the media, they're all gone. But the architect's design is bigger than any one of you. Even if you think you've won, you haven't seen the full board. Grace's jaw tightened. We've seen enough to dismantle everything you and your allies built. Your network is exposed. Your manipulations are public. Your reach is smaller than you think. Isabella's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. Perhaps, but the world doesn't care about evidence. It cares about perception. And perception is something you still don't control. Grace's heart pounded. Every word Isabella spoke was designed to unnerve, to make them hesitate. But the months of deception, the betrayals, the late nights spent analyzing, running, and outsmarting enemies had honed Grace's mind into razor-sharp focus. You relied on fear, Grace said softly, deliberately. But fear isn't enough to control people who refuse to be controlled. That's your mistake. Dominic placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, grounding her. We've faced every threat you could throw at us, and we've survived. Together. Isabella's expression shifted subtly, the first crack in her composed facade. You understand more than I expected, perhaps even enough to challenge me. Grace stepped closer. Enough to end this. And we will. She inserted the flash drive into the tower's terminal, connecting it to the city's public broadcast channels via the secure network Quinn had established. The data streamed outward. Every hidden communication, every financial manipulation, every covert instruction tied to Halvorsen, Shadow Corp, and the architect. The world would see everything in real time. Isabella's eyes widened, her calm facade faltering. How? Grace didn't answer. She watched as evidence, once hidden in shadows and encrypted files, became public knowledge. The architect's influence, the manipulations, the lies, all laid bare. From below, sirens blared. Shadow Corp's remaining agents had been identified and detained by authorities, alerted through the live data leak. Officials now had undeniable proof of the conspiracy. and the public would ensure that justice followed. Dominic exhaled, his tension easing slightly. "It's over." Grace shook her head. "Not quite. Isabella still stands in front of us." Isabella's gaze hardened, a mixture of fury and resignation. "I underestimated you. You had the courage to act when others hesitated. Perhaps that is why you survive, while I will not be remembered kindly." Dominic stepped forward, voice steady. "We're not here to destroy you. We're here to stop you from harming anyone else." Grace added, "You have a choice, Isabella. Come with us, cooperate, and you can make amends. Resist, and the consequences will follow." For a moment, the wind carried nothing but silence. The three of them suspended in tension, the rain-slicked city below like a stage. And then Isabella nodded. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her hands, and for the first time in weeks, Grace felt the weight of reconciliation, of justice that didn't require vengeance. The following days were chaotic, but cathartic. Halverson, exposed and disgraced, faced legal consequences. Shadow Corp's executives were arrested or fled. Investigators worked tirelessly to trace the architect, whose network had begun to collapse from within. Grace and Dominic navigated the fallout carefully. Dominic publicly acknowledged his unwitting involvement, while Grace's role as the one who had uncovered the truth remained discreet. The world, now aware of the systemic manipulations, demanded accountability, and Grace and Dominic had delivered it. Quinn returned to his quiet role within the mansion, no longer a covert insider but a trusted ally. Marissa's work as a journalist became instrumental in exposing remaining conspirators, her meticulous verification providing credibility to the revelations. For Grace, the emotional aftermath was profound. The months of fear, betrayal, and near-constant danger had left scars, but also a sense of empowerment. She had taken control of a narrative that had tried to define her as powerless, as expendable. Dominic, too, was changed. The polished, untouchable billionaire had confronted his own assumptions, recognized his vulnerabilities, and learned the value of trust forged under pressure. He had learned that power without empathy was dangerous, but power with courage and insight could change the world. One evening, Grace and Dominic stood on the mansion terrace, looking out at the city. The lights, once reflections of hidden dangers, now felt like a city alive with awareness, accountability, and possibility. Dominic broke the silence. "We survived everything, and we're still standing," Grace nodded. "Yes, but surviving isn't the same as thriving. We've rebuilt, but the world hasn't stopped. The consequences of truth ripple far beyond us." Dominic glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Then we keep moving, together." Grace exhaled, letting the weight of months of struggle ease from her shoulders. The flash drive sat on the table between them, no longer a weapon but a symbol of truth, courage, and survival. Months later, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Dominic's business operated under public scrutiny but with newfound integrity. Grace worked quietly, ensuring that vulnerable people, those whom the manipulations of powerful organizations had harmed, received protection and advocacy. Occasionally, they would receive encrypted messages from former Shadow Corp officials, now cooperating with authorities, revealing fragments of operations they had never fully understood. Each message was a reminder of how close they had come to being overwhelmed, but also of how far they had come in reclaiming agency. One evening, standing by the terrace once more, Grace reflected on the journey. The betrayals, the fears, the high-stakes gambles, and the revelations had all been part of a long, harrowing path. She looked at Dominic. "The world isn't perfect," she said softly. "But sometimes doing the right thing changes it anyway." Dominic's eyes met hers, steady, warm. "And sometimes surviving the storm allows you to rebuild the parts that matter most." Grace nodded. The city stretched before them, alive, imperfect, and full of stories yet to unfold. They had faced deception, discrimination, betrayal, and danger, and yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. For Grace, the lesson was clear. Courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear. Justice wasn't about perfection. It was about exposing truth, standing firm, and refusing to be manipulated by those who thrived on secrecy. Dominic's hand brushed hers, a silent affirmation of partnership, trust, and shared purpose. And as the night sky stretched over the city, quiet and vast, Grace allowed herself a small, steadying smile. The storm had passed. The new normal had begun. Truth, once hidden in shadows and fear, had illuminated their path. Not perfectly, not without cost, but enough to remind them that courage and integrity could outlast deception, and that even in a fractured world, some light always remains.